The cold darkness of space trembled as the Exarathian Dominion's fleet emerged from hyperspace, their massive warships casting long shadows over Earth. These were not ordinary invaders. They were legends whispered in fear across the galaxy. The Exarathians were immortal, a race of warriors with bodies infused with self-regenerating nanotechnology, making them impossible to kill. They had conquered thousands of worlds, crushing every species that dared resist them. No civilization had ever survived their assault, and now their soulless, glowing eyes turned toward Earth. Humanity had never faced a threat like this before. The invasion was not a warning, it was a declaration of absolute dominance. The Exarathian warlord, Korvath, stood at the bridge of his dreadnought. He had seen the pathetic resistance of other species before. The outcome was always the same. This would be no different. The attack began without mercy. Earth's defenses activated instantly, launching every available fighter and missile against the approaching fleet. Explosions lit up the sky as humanity's forces clashed with the invaders, but the battle was one-sided. The Exarathians' warships were built from living metal, regenerating almost as fast as they were damaged. Every fighter shot down, every warship destroyed, only delayed the inevitable. Their foot soldiers landed in massive drop pods, hitting the ground like falling meteors. The moment they emerged, the world saw what true terror looked like. They were tall, armored figures, their bodies pulsing with an eerie, golden glow. Each one was a walking nightmare, shrugging off bullets, regenerating limbs, and continuing their march forward no matter how much damage they took. Human soldiers fought bravely, unleashing everything they had: tanks, artillery, explosives, but nothing worked. The Exarathians did not die. No matter how many times they were struck down, their bodies repaired themselves in seconds, rising again as if nothing had happened. Panic spread through the ranks as the impossible became clear. This enemy could not be stopped. City after city fell under their relentless advance. Skyscrapers crumbled, streets burned, and millions of terrified civilians tried to flee, but there was nowhere to run. The Exarathians did not negotiate, did not take prisoners, and did not show mercy. Every battle ended the same way: entire cities turned to ruins, their people erased from existence. The world's greatest military minds gathered in underground bunkers, desperate for a solution. How could they fight an enemy that refused to stay dead? No matter what strategy they used, the result was the same. Humanity was losing. In the heart of the chaos, Dr. Ethan Voss, one of Earth's top scientists, watched the destruction unfold from a hidden laboratory deep beneath the surface. He had spent years studying advanced technology, theories that were considered impossible, weapons that should never exist. But now, with Earth on the brink of annihilation, he realized there was no choice. The weapon he had built in secret, something even the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy feared, was humanity's last hope. The world had believed that the Exarathians could not be killed. But Dr. Voss knew something no one else did. They were not truly immortal. They had a weakness. And he had found it.asa, the final strongholds of Earth, struggled to hold back the tide of invaders. The world's leaders made a desperate decision. Dr. Voss would be given full authority to unleash his weapon. There was no time for debate. There was no other option. Either they used it, or humanity would be wiped from existence. The order was given. Deep underground, a hidden facility powered up. The countdown began. Humanity's last chance had arrived. Above the planet, aboard the command ship, Warlord Korvath watched Earth's forces collapse with a cold, mechanical gaze. He had seen this 1,000 times before. Every species fought. Every species believed they could win. And every species fell before the unstoppable might of the Exarathian Dominion. He turned away from the battlefield, already considering his next conquest. Earth was just another planet in a long line of victories. He did not yet realize that this time would be different. Deep below the surface, the countdown reached 0. The weapon activated. And for the first time in history, an immortal warrior would fall and never rise again. The world was burning. Cities that once stood tall were now nothing but smoking ruins, their streets littered with the wreckage of war. The Xeratheans had proven to be unstoppable. Their immortal warriors cutting through Earth's defenses like a scythe through dry grass. Every weapon, every strategy, every last desperate attempt to stop them had failed. Humanity had reached its breaking point. The remaining military forces were retreating, not because they wanted to, but because there was no other choice. The enemy could not be killed. No matter how many times they were gunned down, crushed, or blasted apart, they rose again, their self-regenerating bodies repairing themselves in seconds. The defenders of Earth had fought bravely, but bravery was no match for an enemy that did not die. The last stronghold of humanity stood in the underground city of Fort Haven, hidden beneath layers of reinforced steel and rock. It had become the final refuge for soldiers, scientists, and the few remaining leaders of Earth. Every screen inside the command center displayed the same grim reality: the Xeratheans were closing in. There were no more reinforcements coming. No more allies left to call. The last of Earth's armies had gathered for a final battle, not to win, but to buy enough time for a single chance, a single desperate plan that might turn the tide. The fate of humanity now rested in the hands of Dr. Ethan Voss. He had spent years developing a weapon unlike any other, something that could do the impossible. While the world believed the Xeratheans were truly immortal, Voss had uncovered a secret, one so dangerous that even the most powerful empires of the galaxy feared it. The Immortals had a weakness, and he had found a way to exploit it. The enemy forces drew closer. The remaining soldiers prepared for what would likely be their last battle. Captain James Rourke, a hardened veteran who had fought in every major battle of the war, stood on the front lines with his troops. He had seen his men die, seen them rise again as the enemy continued their march without hesitation. He knew what was coming. The Xeratheans would not stop until every last human was wiped from existence. But if they could hold them off long enough, if they could delay them just for a little while, Dr. Voss's weapon might be ready in time. That was the only hope they had left. The ground trembled as the first wave of Xerathian warriors approached. Their golden armor shimmered, their glowing eyes locked onto their targets with cold precision. They were silent, never speaking, never hesitating. They moved like a single, unstoppable force, their metallic limbs clicking into place as they marched forward. The moment the battle began, the air was filled with the sound of gunfire, explosions, and the desperate cries of soldiers fighting for their lives. Earth's forces unleashed everything they had: high-powered railguns, plasma cannons, experimental energy weapons. Each blast hit its mark, tearing through the enemy ranks. But it didn't matter. The Xeratheans fell, only to rise again within seconds. Their wounds closed almost instantly, their bodies regenerating faster than any weapon could destroy them. For every human that fell, it was a permanent loss. But for the Xeratheans, death was meaningless. They never tired, never bled, never faltered. The battle turned into a massacre. Soldiers who had fought bravely moments ago were now lying lifeless on the battlefield, their weapons scattered beside them. Captain Rourke watched as his men were cut down one by one, their screams echoing in his ears. He clenched his fists, his mind racing for a solution. But there was none. They were fighting against something that could not be stopped. Inside the underground command center, Dr. Voss worked feverishly, his hands moving. Across the control panel of a device that could change everything. The weapon was unlike anything the universe had ever seen. It did not destroy bodies. It did not rely on brute force. Instead, it targeted something far more important, the very essence of the Xeratheans themselves. Voss had discovered that their immortality was not natural. It was the result of a complex, advanced neural network that constantly repaired their bodies. They were not regenerating in the way organic beings did. Instead, their consciousness was stored and transferred within an artificial system embedded in their very cells. This was their true weakness. If that system could be disrupted, the Xeratheans would fall and stay dead. The problem was that the weapon required time to activate, time that they did not have. As the enemy forces pushed forward, cutting through the last of Earth's defenses, Voss knew they were out of options. The battle was lost. The Exarathians were moments away from breaking through the last barrier protecting the command center. If that happened, the war would be over. Humanity would be erased from existence, and Earth would be just another conquered world in the Dominion's long history of destruction. There was only one chance left. The weapon had to be activated now. Captain Rourke received the final order from command. Hold the line at all costs. Even though he knew what that meant, he did not hesitate. He rallied the remaining soldiers, their numbers reduced to just a handful of exhausted, wounded men. They stood their ground, knowing they would not survive. But if they could hold the enemy off just a little longer, they could give Voss the time he needed. The battle became a brutal last stand. Hand-to-hand combat erupted in the trenches, soldiers using everything at their disposal to keep the invaders back. Blades clashed, bodies fell, and blood stained the earth. Rourke fought with everything he had, his rifle empty, his fists swinging, his body covered in wounds. But still, he refused to fall. And then, it happened. Deep underground, the weapon activated. A pulse of energy spread through the air, unseen but powerful. It reached the battlefield in an instant, passing through the Exarathians like a silent storm. At first, nothing happened. But then, one of the warriors suddenly froze in place, its glowing eyes flickering before dimming completely. It fell to the ground and did not rise again. Another followed. Then another. The immortals were dying. The battlefield fell silent as the Exarathians collapsed one by one, their bodies shutting down permanently. The warriors who had once been unstoppable were now motionless husks, their golden armor dulled, their glowing cores extinguished forever. The remaining human soldiers watched in shock, unable to believe what they were seeing. For the first time in history, an immortal enemy had been defeated. Captain Rourke, bleeding and exhausted, stared at the fallen invaders. He could barely stand, his body broken from battle. But as he looked around, he saw something that had not been seen in a long time: hope. The war was not over, but for the first time, humanity had a chance. The last stand had worked. They had survived. And now, they were ready to fight back. The Galactic Council had strict laws that had kept the galaxy in balance for millennia. There were weapons that civilizations could build, and there were those that were forbidden, locked away in the records of history, never to be used again. Among these, one weapon was feared above all. A weapon so powerful, so unnatural, that even the most ruthless warlords had refused to create it. The Council had destroyed every blueprint, wiped every trace from the archives, and executed anyone who even spoke of its existence. And yet, in the darkest corner of the galaxy, in a system long abandoned, whispers began to spread. Someone had done the impossible. Someone had built the weapon that shouldn't exist. The news sent shockwaves across the universe, but no one could confirm it until the Zurich Empire received a distress call from one of their most fortified colonies. A fleet of over 1,000 ships had vanished within minutes. No wreckage, no survivors. Just a silent transmission filled with screams, cut off before any real message could be sent. The Zurich, known for their brutal conquests, were not easily frightened. But this was different. Even their supreme warlord, Varoth, felt something he had never known before: fear. If the weapon was real, it had to be found and destroyed before it could fall into the wrong hands. The Zurich sent an armada, the largest fleet ever assembled, to investigate. Their ships entered the dead system where the colony once stood, expecting a battle. But there was no enemy, no sign of war. Just silence. The planet below was nothing but blackened ruins. Entire cities turned to dust. The air was thick with energy, a presence that sent shivers through even the most hardened warriors. Something had wiped out millions in an instant. And then, without warning, the fleet's sensors went dark. The stars disappeared, swallowed by a growing void that twisted reality itself. The Zurich captains panicked, sending emergency signals, but it was too late. The weapon had activated. A single ship emerged from the darkness. It was not Zurich. It was not Council-built. It was something else. Something wrong. A vessel that should not exist, running on technology that should have never been created. It moved without engines, without light. It was a phantom, an unholy thing that radiated a presence not of this universe. And inside, at the heart of it all, sat a single human. His name was Elias Voss, and he had done what no one else had dared. He had built the forbidden weapon. Not for power, not for conquest, but because he had no other choice. Humanity had always been seen as weak, a minor species, barely worth mention in the grand scheme of the galaxy. Their worlds were left alone, not because of treaties or alliances, but because they posed no threat. That was until the Zurak came. They descended on Earth with no warning, destroying cities, enslaving millions, and burning humanity's future to ashes. The Council did nothing. The other species turned their backs. Elias had done what was necessary. He broke every law, defied every order, and vanished into the void to build something that could never be allowed to exist. A weapon that did not destroy ships, but erased them. A force that did not kill, but simply removed. When the Zurak invaded, he tested it for the first time. Their warships, their armies, their entire presence in human space was wiped away in the blink of an eye. Not destroyed. Not defeated. Just gone. Now the Zurak's greatest armada faced the same fate. Their weapons fired in every direction, but it was useless. The darkness spread, devouring ships, swallowing warriors whole. No screams. No wreckage. Just nothing. In mere moments, the largest fleet in Zurak history ceased to exist. And then, Elias did something even worse. He turned his ship toward the Council. The galactic rulers had allowed this war to happen. They had let humanity burn, all because they had been too weak to matter. Now, Elias would show them the cost of their inaction. The forbidden weapon moved through space, unstoppable, undetectable. The Council's fleets assembled, preparing to stop what was coming. But they already knew the truth. There was no stopping him. The weapon that shouldn't exist had already changed everything. For centuries, they were believed to be invincible. The Eldari, an ancient race that had ruled the galaxy for millennia, were known as the Immortals. Their bodies were immune to time, their technology was unmatched, and their empire had never known defeat. They watched as species rose and fell, as civilizations burned and new ones took their place, but no force had ever threatened their reign. The mere thought of their fall was considered impossible. That was until they made the mistake of challenging humanity. It began with an experiment. The Eldari had always viewed other species as tools, resources to be used, studied, or discarded. When they heard whispers of humanity's strange resilience, they were intrigued. Humans were physically weak compared to other species, but they refused to die easily. They survived wounds that should have been fatal, endured pain that would have broken others, and adapted to environments where no life should exist. It was unnatural. The Eldari needed to know why. So, they abducted thousands, taking them to hidden research stations, performing experiments that would break any other species. But humans did not break. The more they tested, the more they realized their mistake. Humans did not just survive suffering, they grew stronger from it. Every test, every painful experiment. The Eldari scientists became nervous. They had never seen anything like this. For the first time in history, the Immortals began to feel something unfamiliar: doubt. And then, one day, their test subjects vanished. Entire research stations wiped out. Scientists and guards slaughtered. The surveillance feeds showed nothing. Just empty halls where humans once lay in cages, now abandoned, as if they had never been there. The Eldari tried to contain the situation, but it was already too late. Humanity knew what they had done. A single message was sent to the Eldari High Command. 3 words: "You are next." At first, they laughed. No species had ever threatened them before. What could humans possibly do? Their fleets were small, their numbers were few, and their worlds were scattered. The Eldari war machine was vast, capable of wiping out entire civilizations with a single command. They were the Immortals. Humanity was nothing more than an inconvenience. Then, the First World fell. A colony of 10 million Eldari gone in a single night. No alarms, No distress signals. Just silence. When their ships arrived to investigate, all they found were abandoned cities, the streets stained with blood. The bodies of their warriors lay where they had stood, but there was no sign of battle. No energy burns, no weapon marks, just cold, precise execution. The humans had come and disappeared like ghosts. The Eldari sent fleets to stop them, but something was wrong. Their warships, once feared across the galaxy, were being hunted. They would enter human space, fully armed, only to vanish one by one. Their distress calls were filled with panic. They're inside the ship. We can't see them. They're already here. Before the signals went silent, entire armadas, swallowed by the darkness. The Council grew desperate. They ordered every Eldari colony to fortify its defenses, to prepare for a war unlike any before. But the war never came. Instead, the humans picked them apart, piece by piece. Their supply lines collapsed. Their communication networks failed. Their leaders, once seen as gods, were assassinated in their own palaces, surrounded by guards. The immortals were no longer in control. They were prey. Panic spread through the empire. Eldari civilians, who once believed in their eternal rule, now whispered of the ghosts in the dark. Soldiers refused to fight. Admirals deserted. Planets surrendered before the humans even arrived, hoping to be spared. But the humans had not come for territory. They had not come for power. They had come for vengeance. The final blow came when the humans stormed the Eldari homeworld. The capital, which had stood untouched for millions of years, fell in a single day. The last surviving Eldari emperor, once worshipped as a living god, was dragged from his throne and forced to face the truth. The immortals were not invincible. They were not eternal. They were not gods. They were simply the next empire to fall. And humanity had ensured that this time there would be no survivors. For as long as the galaxy remembered, the Dravari Dominion had ruled with an iron fist. They were conquerors, warlords who crushed civilizations beneath their boots, leaving nothing but submission and ruins in their wake. Every species they encountered had only two choices: serve or perish. No force had ever stood against them for long. Their fleets, vast and merciless, burned planets into compliance. Their armies, bred for war, never knew defeat. The Dravari believed they were unstoppable, eternal, unchallenged. Then, they made the mistake of invading Earth at first. It was nothing more than routine conquest. Humanity was just another species to be enslaved, another world to be added to their collection. The Dravari's fleets descended upon Earth with overwhelming force, their warships blotting out the sky, their soldiers ready to crush all resistance. They had done this 1,000 times before. It was supposed to be easy, it wasn't. The humans fought back. Not just with weapons, but with something the Dravari had never encountered before: defiance. Other species surrendered when faced with annihilation. Humans did not. They fought with everything they had, turning their cities into death traps, using every resource, every piece of technology, and even their own bodies as weapons. They refused to kneel. Even when outnumbered, even when outgunned, they fought as if death meant nothing to them. The Dravari commanders grew frustrated. They bombed entire cities, hoping to break the human spirit. But instead of surrendering, they became even more dangerous. Civilians became soldiers. Scientists turned factories into weapons. Even their wounded fought, refusing to let their world fall. No species had ever resisted like this. The Dravari, for the first time in their existence, realized they were in a war they did not understand. And then, the real nightmare began. The humans did something no other species had ever dared. They took the war to the Dravari. Before, the Dominion had always fought on enemy soil, keeping their own world untouched. But that changed when the first human warship appeared in Dravari space. It was smaller than their battleships, crude in design, yet somehow it destroyed an entire fleet. Reports came in from across the Empire. Human forces were everywhere. They were striking supply lines, disabling defense networks, assassinating key leaders. It was impossible. How could such a young species fight like this? The Dravari underestimated them. A fatal mistake. The humans were not just warriors, they were hunters. They did not fight like other species. They did not follow the rules of war. They adapted, they learned, they evolved. Every battle made them deadlier. Every fallen soldier taught them a new strategy. They did not fear pain, did not fear death. And worst of all, they did not stop. The Dravari homeworld, once thought impenetrable, fell into chaos. Their fleets, once the most powerful in the galaxy, were in ruins. Their armies, once unchallenged, were in retreat. The conquerors who had ruled for centuries now found themselves hunted in their own territory. Fear spread among their ranks. The war that was supposed to last weeks had become a war of survival for them. The final battle came when the last of the Dravari High Command gathered in their strongest fortress, believing they could still hold out. They thought humans would give them time to negotiate, to surrender on their terms. But the humans had no interest in surrender. They wanted an end. And so, the fortress fell, its walls shattered, its leaders executed. The Dravari Dominion ceased to exist. The conquerors, who once believed they were the masters of the galaxy, were now nothing more than a lesson, a warning to those who thought humanity could be broken. The war was over. Humanity had won.